There's this
Mike Winger, who you may know, I've debated Mike once. I've covered Mike several times on the channel. His channel has really blown up over the number of years. He has become quite an apologist and largely preaches to Christians. He doesn't do a lot of stuff on the proof for God anymore. He's mainly a ministry to his own congregation, which is fair and well. But Mike wanted to put out this particular video talking about um, what we non-believers expect and where we non-believers are falling short in our evaluation of the evidence for God.
eye that it maybe is best explained by the analogy of eyes being open or closed. When you close your eyes, there's nothing in the room. And as long as you keep your eyes closed, I could say to you, prove to me that there's a painting in the room. I'm going to keep my eyes closed.
Okay. So he's jumped right into it, as this is one of those YouTube short / TikTok type videos, jumping right in. Mike wants to tell us that there's a divide between the way non-believers evaluate evidence and the way we should evaluate evidence. He's likening it to putting someone in a room with their eyes closed and asking them to prove that there's a painting. But of course, if you think about this hard, this starts to fall down. So one of the things Mike said was, if you close your eyes, there's nothing in the room. Well, obviously, when you close your eyes, you still have plenty of other senses to tell you what's going on. You can hear things, you can sense the temperature in the room, if there's wind, if there's sound. You'll feel that you're sitting on a chair or there's feet under your floor. There's plenty of sensory input that you're getting about the room beyond just the sight. Similarly, if you were a person who had no sight of any kind and you were in a room and someone said, hey, there's a painting here, you couldn't just say, well, I got to take their word for it. There's plenty of other ways that a blind person could become convinced that there's a painting in the room. You could lead them over and have them touch the painting, and potentially you'd be able to feel that it's canvas. And if you've ever touched a painting, you can sense the dry paint on there and the various textures. It would give off a certain smell potentially. The painting. Additionally, other sighted people could come into the room, and there could be other people whom you trust to various degrees who could come in the room and tell you whether or not they see a painting. That might be something you might want to do even if you see a painting, is, hey, do you also see the painting? You could be hallucinating a painting. So this one likening a disbeliever's disbelief to one isolated sense, not a great analogy, but I'm going to let him roll with it. That's not the crux of the problem here.
It's going to be harder to prove that. Or I open my eyes, in which case I'm not even asking. And this is what often happens, I think, with skeptics. There's so much taken for granted as they begin their study for God.
So perhaps you can sense where this is going to go. He's talking about skeptics as if a skeptic starts disbelieving in God and carries that disbelief over. The trouble is for myself and for many like me, including many of you who are watching the channel right now. Hey, fellow ex-Christians and ex-religious people, we didn't start with presuppositions that God doesn't exist. We didn't come carrying the baggage that he's about to talk about here. The disbelief from God does not, anytime you're assigning motivation, if you're assigning, why someone is choosing to believe something rather than disbelieve, I think you're in dangerous territory, and I think it's a mistake. And I think it paints everyone else as an other in a way that I think Mike is doing these days rather than trying to recruit the others.
In looking for God, right? They look around at the universe. They look around at creation. They look around at their own life. They feel their own soul, their own being. They see beauty, morality, and goodness. And that's all just there without explanation for them.
We see the world. We see the universe. We have a sense of ourself. We see beauty. We see morality. And we see goodness. And those just exist in our views. Like Mike can't even put himself in the place where someone has thought about where those exist. I don't know any skeptics who just say, hey, you know what? We can't ever know where goodness or beauty comes from, so let's never think about it. And let's look at those. Let's skip morality for the moment because morality is going to be a big one coming up. But let's look at the first, beauty and goodness. So what's beauty? Beauty typically is considered something we consider to be aesthetically pleasing. Of course, we can also consider something to smell beautiful or to sound beautiful, or you can love the way something feels. I think that all, I know we don't use the word beauty in English, but I think that all pleasing to the senses is, I think, what Mike is referring to in terms of beauty here. Now, does the fact that we appreciate the way some things some things tickle our senses more than other things tickle our senses, does that require a God? What would a universe look like with no God? Would we be sentient beings with literally no preferences? That everything looks exactly the same to us? That that a garbage dump to us looks every bit as attractive as a flower bed? Would you, according to Mike, if we're just beauty just exists and we can't explain it, that just basically is saying that you can't relatively rank things, right? Which is ridiculous. So I've never understood this appeal to beauty. And of course, what they want to do is well, lots of us think that the same things are beautiful. Well, so what? Most of our genetics are the same. Most of our upbringing is the same. Of course, you can't even really go across cultures with beauty, although certain times certain parts of nature do cross cultures. But again, these are easily explained by, well, you know what? For example, the attractiveness of mates. I know that attractiveness is a very complicated thing, but it's not very hard to understand that as sexual beings, that at a time, we're no longer in that point in our evolutionary history, but at a time in our evolutionary history where, you know, you're not sure if your offspring is going to survive, and you're not sure that your offspring is going to be viable, all those kind of things, to be more sexually attracted, to want to reproduce with someone who looks like they are capable in some way, either through strength or through intelligence or through some other quality or through riches even. Like if you see a quality in someone that you think is going to create the bigger benefit for your children, that's going to just also seem attractive, right? And those are going to be things that people tend to. You're going to, if that's the way your genes work, you're going to pass that kind of stuff along to your kids more often than not. The same thing is, of course, just true with general beauty. Like this idea that beauty needs a God, ridiculous. Same thing with goodness. Goodness is just a measure of things we prefer. That's just the label. So I might say that a certain type of dessert is good, and that dessert may not appeal to you. Well, it doesn't matter because I say it's good because I prefer it to other things. I prefer ice cream to cauliflower. In Mike's world, apparently, if there was no God, everything would be the same to us. We wouldn't prefer one thing over another. I've given the analogy before of you don't need to have an objective measure of length to be able to tell that one stick is longer than another. And that's all the goodness is. That's all the beauty is. A subjective measure that we give comparing two things. We don't need an objective measurement to get there. We'll get to morality later. It's a very similar story. But sorry, Mike, we non-Christians don't just say la-di-da, we don't know or care where beauty comes from.
And then they turn to you and say, okay, now prove there's a God. And you're like, you're sort of starting from a place where you have missed all the evidence.
You're starting from the point where you've missed all the evidence. So Mike is basically giving, I think what he's trying to say is he gives a look at the trees argument, which is this nebulous, look at that thing over there. Aren't you impressed by it? Or doesn't it make you feel a certain way? And that's most of the evidence. If this is the kind of evidence that you think that skeptics aren't beholding, you're wrong. We've beheld beauty. We've looked at these things. We just don't need to ascribe the same things you do. What you need, the evidence we're looking for, Mike, is not that mountain ranges are beautiful, not that oceans are beautiful, but why we should think that a God is necessary to either have those things exist or to appreciate them. So, sorry. I think that we skeptics are fully justified in not lending subjective measures the evidence that we don't even start with. Sorry, bud. But what do you think? Have I overblown this? Is Mike on good footing? Are we skeptics entirely missing the point of beauty, morality, and goodness? Is the reason why we can't accept second-hand sources for a resurrection, or third-hand or 15th-hand sources for resurrection, because we don't stop and think why we think that a tree is beautiful? Let me know in the chat. Let me know in the comments. And let me know if maybe you know other Christians who argue this way. What should I have said? What's your retort back to Mike?